to this episode of Equalizer. I'm your host, William Acosta. Today, we are doing the second part with a guest, retired DEA Assistant Special Agent in Charge Richard T. Sanchez, a highly respected federal investigator and leader whose career has taken him from the highways of Texas as a state trooper to the front lines of international narcotic enforcement across the U.S., Mexico, Latin America, and Europe. Over more than 21 years with the Drug Enforcement Administration, Richard led multi-agency task forces in McAllen, Texas, helped steer sensitive operations through the DEA's Special Operation Division, and ultimately served as an ASAC of the DEA's European Division, where he built the strategic partnerships with U.S. and foreign law enforcement and intelligence services to target some of the world's most powerful transnational criminal organizations. Today, Richard joins Equalizer not only as a veteran federal agent, but as the president and CEO of One Team Global, a company dedicated to resilience, post-traumatic growth, and leadership development, and as the author of the upcoming book, Chasing the High, a deeply personal and hybrid biography that examines the hidden battles, moral dilemmas, and search for purpose behind the life spent in high-risk operations. Hi, Richard. Welcome to the second part of the interview here in Equalizer. I really appreciate you taking your time for the second part of a very important message regarding your book, Chasing the High. We're going to start with the DPS to federal transition. What did it really feel like the day you realized you were leaving DPS, a place that had become home, to enter the federal world when no one knew your name yet?
It was a challenge. And first and foremost, thank you for having me back. I'm very excited to be here and spend this time with you. But to answer your question, it was a tough decision. Almost like breaking up with your first girlfriend. Was very challenging for me in the sense of, it was the agency accepted me. I had earned my reputation. I had worked hard. I had, at one hand, despite all the challenges and hurdles and obstacles, had proven a lot of people wrong. I was still fighting to prove myself wrong more than anything. I was outrunning the demons, and what better way to do that than move on to another agency and to other challenges where people said, you can't do that. Those were the common words that I heard during my life in my young childhood was, you're too stupid, you're too dumb, you're not going to be able to accomplish anything, you're going to be like your dad, just get used to it. And being the fighter that I am, and that I was even more so in those early stages, I fought to prove people wrong. So for me to make that adjustment, it was hard. And I almost went back, but I felt like had I gone back, then I would have just been giving in to what people said all along, that I couldn't do it.
When that federal selection letter came, what part of you felt vindicated and what part of you felt exposed?
Well, it was a very challenging time to even get hired. And as you'll see and listen to me talk, it's, the Lord put the right people in my life at the right time. And it was a DEA recruiter by the name of Pamela Arcemont that once again saw my background and said, there's no way we're going to hire you. There's absolutely not. So again, I was judged by the sins of my parents, and once again, I was given the opportunity to express why I they should reconsider, and she pushed the paperwork through. Um, so to answer your question, it was the part of me that felt vindicated was I did it. I remember sitting back when I told my grandmother that I was applying to DPS, and there was a couple of my relatives in the room. They're like, "Why do you want to do that? Why don't you go do something else?" They ostracized me because of the career that I was choosing, and then even more so when I got to the federal government. Once again, I was even pushed aside further. So you grow up already alone, and then you make a family that and a reputation, and then once again you're all alone, starting over again. It was a challenge.
During the Federal Academy phase, what moment humbled you the most and made you think, I'm not the sharpest guy in the room anymore?
It was during the time when I was sitting in class, and you know surrounded by some very, very intelligent individuals that have since gone on to become very successful in DEA. The way they articulated, the way they navigated the federal waters, some of them had already been in the federal government. The way they were able to express, themselves during, challenging situations. You learn a lot from guys like that. And my side was, man, I don't have a master's degree. I barely have a bachelor's degree. And, some of these guys have been in the education system and came from very prominent families. And even some were legacy DEA agents. So their parents had been in DEA. And here I was, ashamed and embarrassed to say, where I came from. And other than I was a state trooper, which held some weight.
In every agency, there is the people that could write real well, and they could do reports that mimic attorney presentations, and then you have guys that are hands-on, guys that when they are in a set as undercovers do excellent work. Not everybody's a writer. Not everybody's technically inclined to sit in a wire room, navigating all of this computer and phone lines and all of that on a Title 21 or whatever operation they are, or setting up equipment, hitting cameras or tracking devices on vehicles. And it's a learning experience, step by step. The more you see it and the more you practice it, the better you get at it. But there are guys that are talented in certain aspects. And you as a former ASAC or supervisor, you knew who could do what and who you could count to get you out of the problems. Is that a good?
No, that's absolutely accurate. And one of the things that I learned early on in my DPS career, I worked for a lieutenant by the name of Ralph Schrammick. And Ralph was very, very intelligent. Now he's probably 80 years old, and he's still running and gunning as a police chief here in the San Antonio area. And I admire and respect him a lot. And again, another individual that gave me a chance to serve in that position as an interdiction trooper, because a lot of people wanted that job, and he reached out and touched me on the shoulder. But one of the most important things that I learned from him as a leader was he surrounded himself with people that you just described that are very good at doing certain aspects of the job. And he didn't measure one versus the other. He accepted what each talent that each individual had, and that is what brought the team together to be successful. And so because of that, I carried that on throughout my career. I surrounded myself with people that we could formulate a team to move the car in the same direction. You know, you see it so many times where groups are made up of agents that want to go in different directions, and you get very little accomplished because everybody's case is the priority. Uh, what always made it a priority for us was, hey, let's concentrate on one of the one or two of the biggest cases we have. We work them as a group, and the whole group gets credit. Everybody has buy-in, and that was what, you know, garnered a lot of success in the national awards and the biggest seizures in around the area and the most prolific arrests was that mentality. And you know, I had buy-in from the agents that worked for me, and it ultimately was their success, not mine. You know, it was very awesome to see.
What part of your past in Floresville and CLE do you consciously keep quiet about during those early weeks at the Federal Training Center?
Oh, what I kept quiet mostly was my story of my family. Um, you know, I'm not a big talker. Anybody that knows me, I watch and I learn and I listen. And I look for the right moments to say, I think, what are impactful, you know, statements. But that transition from CLE to DEA was very difficult because, again, I was learning a whole new set of rules, and it was the moments of sitting in that classroom asking myself, am I in the right place?
I know that there is a part of the course in DEA where you have to learn a lot of the names of the different drugs. And you do flashcards. I don't know if they still use the flashcards. And you have to memorize a lot of information because they give you a lot of quizzes and tests. There is other parts. DEA does a lot of shooting, and you have to be very proficient with your weapon. It's not like they let you walk by. And I find that DEA agents are some of the best shooters out of all of the law enforcement agencies in the United States. I mean, I really find them very proficient because of their training, and I have spoken to different people that have been instructors at Quantico, and they're very proud of the job they do with the young agents in the academy. Because I mean, your life is hanging on the line, and it's not like you have 30,000 people coming to back you. I mean, you work in small teams. Sometimes a door closed behind an apartment or a house, and you by yourself. And by the time the team breaks that door down, if you're not proficient with first, with the way you carry yourself, be able to talk yourself out of situations, be proficient with your weapon in case you have to use it, and be proficient in the tactics that they teach you, whether it's at the undercover school or whether it's you learning it by doing it day in, day out. Is that do I have a good read about how you?
No, absolutely. You know, as far as the drugs, that was never an issue for me, and the training was never an issue for me either. I really enjoy training. I think that's fundamentally the foundation that every officer should have, is making the time to train. Because not only are you training the repetitions, but you're training your mind. You're training yourself under high stress situations, because simply shooting targets that turn is not the reality of what we see on the field. You have to train as real life as you can get it, whether it be with simunition rounds or, you know, the lights and sirens, you know, the flash bangs. The real life as can be training situations. And as far as DEA is concerned, that was one of the most prideful things that we were able to do in McAllen when I was down there, is we built through the utilization of HIDA funds our own shoot house, our own raid house, where we could go down and train and not have to worry so much about availability from one particular police department's range or their, modified entry houses. We had our own. And so it was at the disposal of our agents, who for the most part along the border are brand new. So they still have that energy, they still have the vigor, they still have the drive to want to continue on that training. And me with, as a 20-year veteran, 28 with my DPS time, I still enjoyed it because it keeps you sharp and it prepares you for real life instances.
What skills from DPS and CLE immediately set you apart once it came time for real case exercises at the federal level?
Oh, the undercover work, no doubt. When I promoted into narcotics, uh, again, being blessed by the people around me, an individual by the name of Ruben Duran was my lieutenant. And Ruben took me under his wing. He was my first line supervisor. And him and I worked undercover deals together. So much so where, I was developed in confidential informants that were quality, high value, that could bring quality targets to the game and that were involved in the game. And my ability to do that, and not only that, but the interdiction aspect. We'd get out on the road and stop a car. I knew right away where to go, what to look for, and the anomalies, and find the courier's product in the car without question, which diminished the time to be able to do controlled deliveries, because right away we could glean their cooperation, not have to break open the compartments, and the next thing you know, we're on the way to Chicago doing a controlled delivery. So those simple aspects provided the foundation that led to a great deal of success, not only for me, but for our group.
Looking back at those academy days, what single lesson from the period still serve you in every difficult decision you had to endure during your career?
You had to learn to trust the people around you. And in this world and working as a team, trust is paramount. Without that, you don't have anything.
When you first arrived in Laredo as a federal agent, how did the landscape feel different from your trooper years on the same border?
It was, that part was pretty easy. I had done a lot of work in Laredo um, as a narcotics investigator with DPS. So I knew I had some contacts there already. In San Antonio, as I was transitioning to Laredo, the agents in San Antonio passed some informants to me. So my first day there, I hit the ground running. Did an undercover deal and arrested a guy with a kilo of cocaine. And I think it kind of rose some flags with some of the agents there. It's kind of like, wow, who's this guy just showing up and he's already going to work, on a Sunday at that.
What did the nickname Super Trooper mean to you beneath the surface of the first time you heard it in that office?
So this one guy who turned out to be a very good friend of mine today. I walk in one day and there's a makeshift wrestling belt hung up on the wall and it said Super Trooper. And it was meant to be a jab, but I left it there and I hung it there as pride. And there was a lot to be said about that. And it again was because I came in on the first day, the weekend I was there, and we put somebody in jail, and I don't think they were expecting that. So it kind of, it was meant to be a little, break-in hazing deal, but I wore that belt with pride, and that set the foundation for the rest of my time in Laredo.
How did the Laredo show you that the depth of cartel penetration into ordinary businesses and neighborhoods in a way DPS never could?
Well, DEA, you have such amount of resources that reach far beyond a local community. And in being in Laredo with the nexus to Mexico right there, being the front line, the first line of defense per se, especially during that time, because the Zetas had formed and were up and coming, and we were seeing a vast amount of murders in Nuevo Laredo. The landscape had definitely shifted in that 2004 era. So you were seeing it firsthand with the stash houses and the kidnappings and the cartels operating there with impunity. But see, the agents from Mexico would regularly come into Laredo, and they took me down to Monterey a couple times for some extended TDYs, and I got to understand how the networks of the criminal underworld really began to work. And it was much different because you're seeing it at a scope, a 10,000 foot perspective versus with DPS, where I was working in Carrizo Springs and Uvalde at the time, where you're dealing with the street level amounts because you don't have the resources available to you to develop those high quality informants that are being paid 20, 30, 40, $100,000.
Yeah, I was fortunate to interview one of our friends, Leo Silva, also
Yes, sir.
retired from DEA. He wrote the book Reign of Terror, Zetas.
Yes, sir.
And the Zetas had a very violent nature to them because of their previous training as former special forces of the Mexican military. And they didn't take no for an answer, and they didn't take any prisoners. They were pretty rough. How did that make you feel, safety-wise? And how did it make the other agents feel when you were in the middle of a bunch of snakes? Right, you're right in the middle of everything. I mean,
No, you're in the hornet's nest, and we were, and especially at that time, I was doing a lot of undercover. I posed as a truck driver, so I had my commercial license and would go to the warehouses and pick up 2,000 and 3,000 pounds of marijuana or 50 kilos of coke or whatever the case may be. And Laredo being a small town as it is, you'd always have that concern of running into somebody at the HEB or the local eatery, or even as you're celebrating a success or a win of one of your arrests or seizures. That was always in the back of your mind. And not to mention that, again, the agents were usually centralized in 2 or 3 different areas where we lived. And the propensity for an unknown to occur was always, in the back of everybody's mind, to include mine.
I mean, you had already previous cases in the lives of Kiki Camarena, what happened to him, and what happened to the HSI agents. So all of that starts building up a kind of not fear, but being more careful of your surroundings and more protected as a team, right?
Well, it definitely creates a hypervigilance. There's no doubt about it. But what that also did was create a tighter, close-knit bond with the agents and the task force officers within our office. It was very rare that you would veer outside those networks. Weekends were commonly spent with other agents and their families, and you become very, very close, where you're knowing the agents and the families more than you're knowing your own at times, because you spend so much time together. And again, most of us were all brand new agents in our late 20s or early 30s with a lot of vigor and a lot of energy. So we worked a lot, and it was never an issue. It was never a hassle. And we enjoyed it. But the camaraderie was a phenomenal camaraderie, and that I tell people all the time, once you leave the border, your life will never be the same as an agent when it comes to spending quality time with other agents.
What did
Excuse
your
me.
younger, more reckless teammates in Laredo teach you about courage and about unnecessary risk?
Well, again, I've always been surrounded by phenomenal, fantastic people. And the group I was in was a senior task force officer group. The task force officers had been at DEA 10 plus years. So they all knew how to navigate the federal waters, and they're from Laredo. So, they spoke the language, they had the contacts, they could get things done, they could move mountains. And those task force officers took me under their wing, and that's where the name Mijo was dubbed by a task force officer by the name of Joe Lopez. He used to always call me Mijo. Hey, Mijo, come on, Mijo, let's go, Mijo. And he took me everywhere with him. And then another good friend of mine, Faustino Lopez, was a big man, bigger than me. I stand 6 foot. At that time, I weighed about 220, and he was about 240, 6'2". And we just ran around together, and they took me under the wing to show me right and wrong and how to navigate the federal waters.
How did your own past in Floridville help you communicate with the informants and targets along the border who will not trust just any other Fed? You either have a connection and a way to be approachable and be, and sound sincere to them, that they will feel comfortable with you. They don't feel like they have a Fed looking into their soul, even though you are looking into their soul, but you don't give them that, feeling.
So I learned a long time ago from my grandmother. When I was a young kid, she used to tell me, you have a way to get people to do whatever you want. You got to be careful with that. And I didn't realize what that meant until years later, when I was a CLE trooper, and then they carried on into DEA. It was the compassion that she brought to me and gave to me in my heart to say, hey, look, just because people make bad decisions doesn't mean they're bad people. And I truly believe that. Now, there are some very bad people in this world that don't care about the decisions they make. But there are also some people that make bad decisions, but they're good people. So I treated everybody with respect, regardless of how I felt about the decisions they made to do what they did. And I was sincere with them, and I was honest. And I think a lot of times people sense that. And there were some I just couldn't get to cooperate, but there was a lot that I could because of my approach.
When you remember Laredo now, what is a single image that captures that entire phase of your life?
The bridge, when you come in, the intersecting highways, it's Bob Bullock Loop and 35. It's kind of like a spaghetti of highways, and for me, that was my life. It was just going in so many different directions, just like that intersection. And that's the first major intersection that you see coming into Laredo, and it's the last one in your rearview mirror as you drive away.
When you began taking on deeper undercover roles, what part of yourself did you draw on to sound believable to traffickers?
So that's the thing. I always tell, man, and I just had this conversation today with some individuals. I always play dumb. Like I don't know the business. Because believe it or not, traffickers want to educate you. They want to teach you. They want to take you under their wing. They want to make you a partner with them. They want to continue on because they think they can manipulate you and use you. So I acted like I didn't know what I was doing. And believe it or not, it worked out to my benefit because they would always coach me and teach me and show me what to do, and not knowing that I was undercover.
How did you build the undercover persona without letting them become an excuse to act out of unresolved anger or ego?
It was just a matter of the times of my life that I was going through. And, I'd go through bouts where that was my peace. Being at work was my peace. Being at work was my escape from reality. And that's the fundamental issue that we all face in law enforcement. We don't want to be at home at times because you may have a bad marriage, or you may have a sick child, or you may have a sick wife, or you may be going through issues that work is your escape, and it becomes your identity. And that's what happened to me. It became my identity.
I did a program years ago with Mike Levine, a legend in the DEA.
Yes, sir.
And it was for the BBC in London. It was called Identity Crisis. What happens to people that play undercover roles for a long time and it becomes part of you? And here is my next question. After a long UC day, what do you do to come back to Richard? And what did you later realize was unhealthy about your routine?
Oh, my days were filled, in the evening times with celebrating, and how do you celebrate? You hit the bottle, or you hit the shots, or you hit the booze, and you poke fun at each other, and you talk about what went right and what went wrong, and you continue on until the early morning, and you go to work the next day to relive it all over again.
Was there ever a moment in an undercover meet when you felt dangerous sense of belonging with the people you were pretending to be one of?
So I tell you a story. And Faustino Tino and I were doing an undercover deal in Tampa, Florida. Excuse me. And so the crooks there wanted a couple 1,000 pounds of marijuana. So we put it in an airplane and we flew it out there, and we went and met with them. And then the individuals we met with said, "Hey, let's go and have some drinks tonight." So we all went to the bar and started having a good time. Well, one of the main guys showed up, and he brought his daughter with him. And he said, "Hey, I want to present my daughter to you. I think you guys would formulate a good relationship and make a good couple, and bring me some great grandkids." And I just thought to myself, "Oh my goodness, this is going a little bit too far, man."
And there is a dilemma with that. And when I was teaching down in South America, in Brazil and different countries, undercover tactics with Mike and with Dennis Fitzgerald, DEA agent, who was an attorney. He wrote the book. Let me pull it. It's called Informant and Undercover Investigations. Dennis Fitzgerald. This is the Bible used by a lot of agents and a lot of different law enforcement to learn how to navigate informant handling. And one of the hardest things is you have a lot of beautiful Colombian women, a lot of beautiful Mexican women that are almost honey traps to agents, and a lot of agents could get in trouble. Is that your take?
Oh, 100%. There's always two things that get agents in trouble: informants and money. Those two, and in the DEA world, those two go hand in hand, because you can't do one without the other at times. And informants are a big part of the success we have at DEA. And that's why there's the rules that there are, the 2-man rule, the 2-person rule, to ensure that you always have somebody with you that's when you're meeting informants or you're taking possession of money, so you can remove that the perception that there's something malice going on.
But it becomes even harder for you when you become an ASAC or an agent in charge of an office or an attaché in a different country where you don't have police powers and you are guests in that country, to keep your men safe and honest, which is a very delicate thing, because they go to bars, they go to discotheques, they start going out with regular people, meeting people on their daily basis, nothing to do with their job, but maybe the people that they meeting are trying to target them because they know their real identity and position.
No,
It's
that
just
that that is a that is a challenge, and that's where you rely on your relationships with the agents, and not only that, but your relationships with the supervisors to get an idea when you're engaged as a leader and you're involved. Um, you can tell when things are certain things are awry, and unless you're just completely disconnected and not present and not aware, or you just don't want to do your job, yeah, those things can happen. But with like me, I always made it a point, not because I wanted to be a micromanager, which I never was, uh, but to stay engaged with the agents to ensure that, number one, I cared about their mental health and mental well-being. And that's why I stay engaged, is because I know what I went through as an agent. I know my ups and downs, and I know that I was alone during all of the times when I was at my lowest, and couldn't forgive myself for the transgressions that I had lived as a young adult, and then forgiving myself as a child, blaming myself for the decisions others made. But I stayed engaged because I cared, and I wanted to see them be successful, and I wanted to keep them on the right line when I saw them going astray, to say, hey guys, tighten it up. You're gonna get yourself jammed up, and it let them know that, hey, this guy cares. He cares about what I'm doing, and he's making sure that he's checking on me. And I think that says a lot.
what did it cost you internally to gain the trust of men you knew will eventually you will help them be in handcuffs?
As far as an undercover role, it was, look, I knew they were doing wrong, and it was my job to separate right and wrong, and I was going to do it the best that I could, um, with the tools that I was provided. Um, there were some instances where you meet with the same targets several times, and you just think to yourself, man, this guy could be so successful if he just did the right thing. Um, but at the end of the day, those individuals are hurting our communities, and that's what we're here for, is to ensure that we uphold the Constitution and the oath, and give the 80-year-old lady an opportunity to sit on her front porch without fear or worry of a criminal activity happening in her neighborhood.
How did the memory of your father's charm and manipulation help you survive and perform in undercover conversations?
Man, you just have to zone those out. You stay very focused. Uh, the names that I used during my undercover roles were his names, and that just was a constant reminder of the tools that he gave me as we went around the streets of San Antonio, and I was with him selling dope and ballooning heroin. It was kind of vindicating.
Did you ever had a deja vu when you were talking to somebody and you went back and it brought you back to when you were a boy with your father?
There was a time where I was meeting with some crooks, and they're talking about heroin. Heroin was my dad's drug of choice, and one of the times he got out of prison, he took me to one of his connects house, and I was sitting in the front living room, and they're in the kitchen, and he comes out with blood dripping from his vein because he had just shot up, and I just started crying. I knew right away what it was, but I knew, but I didn't know, and it just broke my heart. And there's those times where you're meeting with these guys, and you're talking about 15, 20, 30 kilos of heroin, and you just think to yourself, that could have been the batch that my dad was getting.
In that area of Laredo and and the border, there's a lot of black tar heroin, which is a different heroin than than the white powder, uh, China white, or Corsican processed heroin. Uh, then the guys that shoot up that heroin, they have a lot of infections. It's like they don't have no more veins to go through, the junkies. It's a very sad situation. I mean, I walked through the streets of Philadelphia a couple of weeks ago, and it's just heartbreaking to see how many people are, hooked up into heroin and into fentanyl and all types of other drugs, sleeping in the streets. I mean, it really hits you because it's taking a human toll of lives and families completely destroyed.
No, 100%, and that's one of the things that I try to impart on my children, of the decisions that we make or they make in their young lives will affect them in their older lives. And we have that here in San Antonio too. Our homeless population and the drug addicts that are living on the streets underneath the highways. It breaks your heart, and it's sad. But the part that I go back to is, we all make choices and we all make decisions. And that could have very easily been me. It could have been very easily sleeping under a bridge because I chose to go the route that my parents had gone. And had I not been blessed the way I've been blessed with so many people coming into my life, and the key was listening to them and learning from them, and trusting them that they had my best interest at heart.
If a young agent tells you they crave undercover glory, what story from your own experience do you share first as a warning?
Oh man, it's when people start wanting glory, there's only one person that gives the glory, and that's Christ above. That's a red flag for me. Fortunately, I've never been in that situation. I have been around agents and task force officers that's their pigeonhole, that's all they want to do. They enjoy it. They love it so much. One of the things that I always try to impart upon them was, listen, don't do that to yourself. Live outside your comfort zone. That's comfort for you. Do something where you can expand a little bit, where you can be a little bit more well-rounded as an agent, even though you don't know how to write a Title III, or you don't know, the intricacies of doing a complex conspiracy. But educate yourself. Get with someone that does. That way you can add to your toolbox of investigative tools.
When you were invited into HIDA at San Antonio, what did the multi-agency high intensity mean to you before you saw it up close?
Oh, that was
one thing is looking at it from the outside, and one thing is being right in the middle of it.
No, that the HIDA is by far is the Super Bowl team of narcotics work. There is nothing else. And why is that? Because they have the allocated resources, they have the infrastructure in place, they have the intelligence network in place to really boost your investigations. And not only that, but you have the other agencies that are all there housed in one building that you can go to, that you have your deconfliction. So it was for me, it was a blessing, because we worked some of the biggest cases in the San Antonio area out of that HIDA unit, and it was phenomenal.
Coming off Columbia Temple, what about HIDA? How did it feel? Too slow? And what felt like a welcome breath?
So it was a change of pace coming from Colombia. I mean, I was on the road 150 days a year, living out of hotels and going into the remote jungles of Colombia with my partners and I, tracking the narco subs, and was fortunate enough to be a part of one of the only fully submersibles ever seen or seized in the world. It was featured on that National Geographics, and we came out on that, and it was a great time to be down there. The work was phenomenal, working with our jungle units and our jungle squads, going out with the guardacostas and on their boats and being able to do interdiction. It was a great time. And then you come back to the U.S., where you're trying to find your way again. Each time you move and each time you start over was, a setback. Like, you had to prove yourself all over again. Yeah, people may have known me, but, the professional jealousy is alive and well. So I had to do that all over again. I had to start as a rookie, per se, and earn my keep.
How did working with Haida sharpen your understanding of how the cartels use interior cities, far from the border, as quiet hubs?
Well, there was, again, the right people were in the right place for me at the time. And there were some very senior agents that didn't need to run and gun. They worked on one case, whether it took them a year or 5 years. But that case was a very complex case, and they put a lot of effort, time, and skill into the investigations. And one of those was Tomas Yarrington, who was the previous governor from Tamaulipas, and the assets that he amassed through his money laundering schemes. Just being in the peripheral, watching those agents work that case, and the details that went into it to make these massive seizures that have never happened in San Antonio since then. But the relationships they formulated with the United States Attorney's Office was crucial in bringing that case to fruition. So just being able to be around that and learn from those guys that they knew how to run the marathon in the federal government, where I had always been a sprinter. And that was the hardest thing there, is to transition from being a sprinter into a long-term, long distance runner.
In Haida, what do you see about the cost of the job and marriages and families that you had not fully registered before?
Well, for me personally, I was single, and there was a senior partner in the group, Denise Stone, phenomenal agent. She was like, "You need to get a girlfriend, because you're just out here. You're out here too much. You're working too hard. If I wasn't with our unit within DEA, I was with the San Antonio Police Department. We were always out there doing something." But learning from those agents, it's just because I didn't want to be at home. I didn't want to go home. I knew once I went through the doors of at that time, my apartment, that, my mind would start racing, and I always just had to stay busy, and it was very, very difficult for me.
No, what I believe that all of us in law enforcement at one time or another in our career, we all suffer from stress syndrome,
PTSD.
TPSD,
Mm-hmm.
stress syndrome, and we don't talk about it. It's like a taboo. When in the military, people are allowed to go to the VA hospital and say, "Listen, I have this," and nobody judges you. They dare to help you. And I believe that if that changes, we could save a lot of lives in law enforcement throughout not only in the United States but the world, where we see all of these syndromes and any type of mental illness, and try to get the people the helping instead of being judgmental.
Yeah, that's, stigma is alive and well in the law enforcement profession. And why is that? Because, we all put the badge on, and we all, think we're invincible, and we all think that nothing will ever happen to us. And it's embarrassing to show our emotions and our soft side. But the reality is, you're stronger, better, and faster if you can show your soft side, because we all have a heart, and that was the one thing for me growing up with my grandfather who, you know, didn't allow us to show our emotions, didn't allow us to express ourselves. We started crying. It was usually followed by a very derogatory term. Uh, and
That's the
so
machismo in the Latino
100%, a hundred
upbringing.
percent, 100%, coupled with, the military that he grew up with. And the military in his time was very different. Um, and so he brought that home. He didn't know any different. He brought it home. And not that I'm making excuses for him, but that's the way I was raised. And, you know, constant beatings and, getting hit with switches from the trees. And, so what do you think is going to happen? How do you think my brain is going to be wired? That took a lot of time. And that's where Roland came into my life when I came back from Colombia. He came in at the right time because I'd go home working at Haida and depression would set in. I couldn't run from it anymore. I don't care how many cases we were working or what was going on. Mentally, emotionally, I was drained. I was done, and
There was some issues that happened in Colombia with, especially one of the agents, Irizarry. Finally, he got arrested, and it took a toll on his teammates because they worked with the guy, um, and he left a bad taste in everybody's mouth. The way that whole thing, developed, that he kept all of these secrets from his teammates that compromised and probably put in danger a lot of their lives also.
no, 100%. And that's why I say, yeah, I may have done some undercover work with DEA, but I did the biggest undercover work within DEA because I held near close to me my signs of depression and bouts of uh you know thoughts of considering hurting myself and just different things that go through your mind because you don't know how to deal with it. You don't know what your outlet is, and you don't want to go to your supervisors and tell them, "Hey, I'm depressed. I can't do this anymore." You're just afraid to do that because you work so hard on your reputation, and just like that, the first time you go into an office, you're labeled. It don't matter what you've done up to that point. You're going to be labeled. And so that's what keeps law enforcement officers from approaching their management. And that's why I firmly believe in the peer-to-peer support, is because there is no judgment. If you pick the right person to confide and trust in, they could do wonders for you.
When Steve slid the case file across to you describing a Colombian supplier front, what voice inside of you said yes, and what voice in you said no?
I don't know that there was a voice that said no. That was a once in a lifetime opportunity that I forever talk about, and
So there was no hesitation of the
there was
part.
no hesitation on.
Everything was let's go.
Let's
Let's
go,
get
and
started.
and because I had the reputation I had, and because Steve had the reputation he had, the bosses asked some questions, but they supported it. But more importantly, we had the connections in Panama, and I had worked with the agents down there, the supervisors down there. They knew me from Colombia, so our reputation really solidified putting the pieces of the puzzle together to be able to go down and make that happen.
What calculation went through your mind when you insisted on Panama as the meeting point for the operation?
I knew that was the place to go. I had been there several times when I was in Colombia. Brent Wood, who was an agent down there, was very aggressive, very well liked, very well respected. And I knew with him, he had the relationship with the bosses there where he could ease this thing up and make it happen. And the first moment they brought it to me, I said, Panama's where we got to go. And man, it worked out. It worked out great.
In the Panama Hotel or restaurant where the UC meet took place, what tiny detail in the room is burned into your memory today?
Man, we did a flash of the port. That was what was it, you know. And we're driving out to this remote jungle area with it was myself, one of the Panamanian undercovers, the informant, and two bad guys, and we're all driving out there, and we get to the remote area, and we show them 50 kilos of cocaine, and you should have seen them, man. Their reactions were priceless. As at that time, everybody was using BlackBerry, so they start taking pictures and sending it to whoever they're sending it to. And meanwhile, the team is probably 20, 30 minutes away from us, but lo and behold, the bad guys didn't know that whole area that we were using was all Panamanian police. So I felt very comfortable and confident being in that environment.
When the informant later admitted he believed you were a true Colombian, how did that affirmation sit with you morally? Because, what is funny is, I mean, your Spanish is not that Colombian.
Oh no, my Spanish is horrible. I'll just tell you right now.
Convince him with your limited Spanish that you were truly a Colombian.
Well, so that's the funny thing about me is I've been fortunate enough to travel, most of the world, and everywhere every time I go somewhere, people confuse me as either being Italian or Colombian or Afghanistan or different parts of the world. They never know that I'm Mexican from Texas.
That's great.
Yeah.
After that operation, when you were alone, what did you say to God about the kind of acting you are now capable of? Was that like, look, I deserve the Oscar for this one?
No, I always say you can't do it alone. I had a very small part in the whole thing, and had some great Panamanian undercovers with me that really kind of pushed that whole deal over the edge. But I did thank God, man, for giving me the opportunity to be in that situation and bringing me out alive.
When Cartagena was first mentioned to you, did it sound like a dream assignment, a sentence, or something in between?
What's funny is we only had two offices in Colombia, Cartagena and Bogota, and I didn't know anything about either one of them. I had no idea that Cartagena was on the coast. I had no idea about the kind of cases they worked. I knew that I wanted to go to Colombia. I knew that was the tip of the spear, and I wanted to be in it. And Misha Piastro was the group supervisor at the time. He called me and gave me an interview. And he goes, well, I think that I'm going to bring you down here. And so when word came about 2 months later, man, I was so excited.
No, I could imagine. I mean, the Bogota office is right out of the embassy in La Esperanza is the name of it's right near the Fiscalia.
Mm-hmm.
And, you have the gates and everything, and you have the tables outside, and you have a small meeting room when you go through the doors where they sit the informants, not to interview them outside. But the Cartagena, you have La Ciudad Amurallada, the beautiful climate, gorgeous women. At night in La Ciudad Amurallada, it's nothing but beautiful women. I mean, a lot of tourists. I mean, it's a lot of bars, a lot of discotheques, and a lot of drugs, because a lot of the cartels, whether it's with the AUC, Clan del Golfo, or whether it's the ELN or the Neo Marquetalia or one of the offshoots of La Nueva Junta del Narcotráfico, that operates out of Dubai, they all have offices. Now, I had an informant one time, and she goes like this to me, you know, I'm going to give you some good information. I'm going to take you to Medellin, and I'm going to take you to the building where La Oficina de Envigado has their office. And I said to the lady, La Oficina de Envigado is an organization. They don't have an office. And the lady pulled back like, and how do you know that? Well, I was born there. I was born in Medellin. So they could, informants try to get and try to blindside you with false hopes.
Right.
Or the kilo deals that never materialize. They come in on Monday, but they don't tell you what year. And people think that it's a fast pace, but you get a lot of running around with no end in sight.
We had that a lot, we had these informants.
Can't chase everything.
No, we had these informants that would come in and want to give us locations of the semi-submersibles and the coordinates, and we'd rouse everybody up, get the guardacostas, the junglas together, formulate a plan to go in on the helicopter, and then the next thing to know, the informant would never show back up for a second meet. So here it was, you had everybody ready to go on standby, getting ready to launch, and then the informant wouldn't show up to take you to the place to show you the location. And so that happened time and time again. We used to go into a town called Tumaco, and
Tumaco,
and they drop us off, and we'd be on the Marine base, or we'd stay at a hotel. There's a really nice little hotel on the beach called Los Corrales, and we'd stay there with the Marines guarding us, and then we did our job.
What did you learn from THUB about leadership that no formal instructor in any academy ever taught you?
So that's T-Hub.
Yeah,
T-Hub and I met for the first time on the phone when I was applying to DEA. He was the one that did my background. And as years went by later on, our paths never crossed. But then he became my senior partner in Colombia. And by that time, he probably had 20 years on the job, 15, 20 years on the job. So he had been around a little bit. He was in international training, so he had traveled, former Marine, so very squared away agent. And not to mention he had a beautiful family. And they welcomed me. They opened their doors into their house and made me a part of their family. And, the thing about T-Hub is, is a very quiet, very impactful person. And just his words of wisdom, because of his experiences and the way he was raised, and his work ethic and his discipline, was something I wanted to emulate.
How did working daily in Colombia with your counterpart challenge some of your assumptions about which country had more to teach the other?
And that was the other thing. Tony and I, we were able to train the guardacostas. You got to keep in mind, some of their units don't have even the equipment or the ammunition to regularly qualify. So Tony and I took it upon ourselves to work with the units that we worked with to train, and whether it be close quarter combat or moving, from target to target, and, although they didn't get a lot of ammunition to practice with, we made do with what they did have. And we trained with them, and we trained them, and they trained us in some of their tactics, which we weren't, trained for, especially when it came to the jungle operations. But some of the other trainings that we were able to show them as far as close quarter combat, was huge. And what it does is it develops a partnership and shows them that you care, and because of that, you become successful, and you formulate friendships, more importantly.
When the name Nicolas Maduro first surfaced in your world, not as a news headline like this week, but as a potential target, how did that change the gravity in the room? Well,
it's
talking about Maduro right now, but people know Maduro for many, many years. They know the Cartel de los Soles for many, many years before this. And it was agents in Colombia and in other places in Latin America that really started forming what is known as this indictment that first happened in 2000, and now the superseding indictment that came down this week.
Yeah, I believe the first one was in 2020.
Yeah,
Um,
2020, right?
and I was able to in the peripheral see some of that happening when I was at our special operations division, and the agents that worked that investigation, they're celebrating today. And it wasn't just Maduro; it was the Honduran presidents, it was Noriega, it was all of those individuals that hide behind their position and use it for ill-gotten means. And unfortunately, it's very sad to see. However, I'm glad that the agents stuck with it, and like I said, there's three things you got to have in this job to be successful. You got to have a great team, to include supervisors. You got to have a great prosecutor, and you got to have the great intelligence network to include your informant base. Without one of those, you're not going to be successful. And the agents that were able to put that all together, the United States Attorney, and the government to take that chance and risk at ensuring that what needed to be done would be done. They did it flawlessly, and kudos to those guys. I couldn't be more proud of DEA right now to see that happen.
Yeah, no, I'm still celebrating today to see the agents doing the perp walk with Maduro and Celia, because it's been a lot of years in the coming, and there's a lot of other targets that need to be picked up in the near future. But I believe that it's a good start, and it's a good message to other narcotic dealing leaders, because I always said that corruption and narcotic trafficking cannot prosper without the blessing of someone in the governments. It just doesn't happen. When people say, yeah, that the cartels in Mexico do everything, no, it's because somebody in the government is getting paid big money, and they're looking the other way, and they are allowing them to operate how they operating today. And one of the things that brought that more to a realization for me was during the pandemic. Pandemic, nothing moved. Why did it work in the pandemic that nothing moved? But after the pandemic, everything went back to normal business. So if we want to win the war on drugs, and this is coming from somebody that might not be an expert, but I've been around for a couple of years, and I have worked in a lot of different countries. I've seen a lot of things. I believe that the resolve that this administration is putting into the fight against traffickers and taking it to their home base is the best I've seen so far.
Oh, no, without a doubt. There's a lot of credit that needs to go to this administration in the way that they're putting America first. Love them or hate them, America's first, and it's great to see, especially when it comes in terms of support for law enforcement. We always see the pendulum shift from one side to the other when it comes for supporting our law enforcement, and cutting of budgets and increasing of budgets and toying with our personnel to for political gain, and that's what's the reassuring factor that I see today, is that the law enforcement pendulum is swinging back towards our favor, because we're human beings. We put our pants on just like everybody else does, one leg at a time, and we bleed the same as everybody else does too. But it's just that we care a lot more than the regular person does about our communities and right and wrong, and instituting respect and into our families, and ensuring that we're going to church and whatever your religion may be, that you're praising and giving thanks, because you can't do this job alone, and you can't survive it alone. It takes your family, and it takes the love and generosity of those that do care for us to keep us going.
My brother, it has been a pleasure having you here today. Can you please tell us how can people get your book? I think your book is an important book for every agent and police officer to have, to read what really goes through the mind of somebody that is dealing with all of these issues, and that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, whether it's through therapy, exercise, talking to a partner, releasing that, not in the bottle or on drugs or hurting yourself, but that there is help, and not to be afraid of to seek that help. You were not born with a gun and with a shield, and if it takes you losing that for a while to get yourself back on track, I beg officers to really listen to what I'm saying today. I think that there's no job that deserves you taking your life for. There is life behind the shield. Everybody has to get from the start to retirement, and you have to learn how to live without that part of your identity crisis, which is law enforcement. And one of the reasons that I believe your book is so important, and I'm really recommending it here, is because it paints a picture that maybe people have touched on, but not as in depth as you have taken this work of love to put out your own personal information out there for everybody to judge, or for people to say, if he was able to accomplish what he did, coming from a background where he was as a child. You didn't choose to be born into a family that was dysfunctional, where there were drug issues, prostitution issues, but you were able to come out of that. And I'm very proud of you, my brother. Listen to me, and I don't say this lightly, not because you're my guest. You're my brother for life, and whatever you need, I'm here. And it's the same thing, any law enforcement officer that needs to talk to somebody. So I've been around the block, whether reporting corruption, whether working overseas with different counterparts, teaching, working in private industry as a criminal defense investigator. I never gave up. At 63, I'm still at it. And now, instead of fighting inside a bag, I'm trying to collapse that bag, learn from the mistakes of the past, and pay forward to new generations of Latino, Black, and white officers that want to start a career in law enforcement.
Look, mental health doesn't discriminate. And, that's what's most important. And I value and I appreciate you so much for giving me the opportunity to be on your show. My books are available at 1910publishing.com, 1910publishing.com, or oneteamg.com, Chasing the High. And I appreciate your kind words when you talk about the book. And, we've spent 2 sessions together speaking, and for me, it's more therapeutic than talking about the book, and I enjoy your company so much. But more importantly, for those that do read it, I'm always here. I'm accessible. I'm easy to get a hold of. I'm available on LinkedIn at Richard T. Sanchez. All my contact information is there. I'm here to help out. If I can save one life, that I've done what I'm supposed to do in this world.
Richard, there are other books that you wrote, and this particular book, the last one, Chasing the High, is going to come in the near future in Spanish. We're
Yes,
going
sir.
to make that happen because,
Yes.
we have a lot of counterparts in Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Mexico, all over in the Latino countries, that even in Spain, the Portuguese in Portugal, or the Brazilians, that is pretty similar to Spanish. Some of the Italians that understand Spanish, that they not by themselves, that there is help. Look for that help, and I beg the rank and file in the NYPD to really take a look inside and stop being judgmental. And in the other agencies, don't be judgmental. Try to help the people preserve a life that is dedicated to serving the people, serving the communities, or serving the federal agencies. Because if we could save a life, we are doing a big service. First, we have to take care of our own so we could take care of our communities.
That's right.
We punish people by putting them in the rubber gun squad, by making phone calls so nobody hires them because they're crazy, or they disgruntled, or they out of control. Get them the help because you hired them.
Yep.
You could become that.
Absolutely.
And bosses that take medication and are medicated with serious medication, but they go to private psychiatric doctors so the job never finds out about it. And that's
Yes, sir.
hypocrisy.
Yep.
All of us are human beings, and we could fall into hard times. Mental illness is a problem in the United States, and is becoming a bigger problem with the legalization of high-powered THC marijuana that is sending children that are not smokers from secondhand smoking of their parents to ERs all over the United States.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And it's a
We definitely.
drug, and you could rationalize it. You could bring down the schedule and the schedule of marijuana, but it's a very potent drug. It's very addictive, and it's very harmful.
No, 100%. I couldn't agree more. I lived it firsthand, and I saw the progression from marijuana to the stronger drugs, and it's unfortunate what's going on today. And I pray that people are able to see that and make choices that are impactful in a positive way to society.
All right, my brother. God bless you. This concludes this episode of Equalizer. This concludes this episode of Equalizer. I want to thank my guest, Mr. Richard T. Sanchez, for joining me and sharing his experience, his insight and leadership and resilience, and the story behind his new book, Chasing the High. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to Equalizer. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like, share with your family and friends, and follow me through the links provided in the screen. A special thanks to our production team. Without their dedication and hard work, this program will not be possible. Until next time, I'm William Acosta, and this has been Equalizer. Stay informed, stay safe, and God bless you guys.